I'm Liz Nowicki. I direct the Office of Professional Development at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work. And we're all here for we're welcoming you to Recovery from Right Conditioning, building anti-racist practice and community. I am going to go ahead and start with some housekeeping information. Once we learned about the interest and response, we shifted from a Zoom meeting to a Zoom webinar. So there's some differences if you've attended both. If you have not, in a Zoom webinar, we cannot see your faces and you won't have the option to use your mics. However, you will be able to participate and be involved and ask questions. So if you have questions for our speaker or for the panelists, please use the question and answer function. You'll find that at the bottom of your panel and should be able to pop that up and type in a question. Christina Combs will provide her presentation and then we'll leave time at the end to respond to your questions. We'll have about 30 minutes for that. We'll be moderating the questions once she's completed the presentation, so feel free to ask them as we move along. However, you're also free to use the chat for discussion during the presentation. If we do see that you've asked a question that would go to our speaker, we'll do our best to redirect you to Q&A. My thanks to Kirsten Dahlquist, who has managed registration and will be monitoring the chat for us this morning. Once the presentation ends, I want to get to the post-event piece. We do hope you'll be prepared to provide feedback. So after the presentation, you'll receive an email from our office with a link to a feedback survey. You'll be asked if you'd like a continuing education certificate, as I know some number of you will, and you'll be directed to provide your name and your email address in another link, and then we'll get an email with a link with the certificate. With that, it is my great honor to introduce our speaker today, Christina Combs. Since receiving her MSW in 2008, Christina Combs has worked as an in-home family therapist, an outpatient therapist, and clinical supervisor of a school-based mental health program. In 2015, after years of struggling to navigate the role and presence of whiteness in her personal, academic, and professional journeys, Christina developed the model of recovery from white conditioning that she'll be sharing with us today. Christina, welcome. We're delighted to have you here. Feel free to get started.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. Thank you to the University of Texas, Austin, for having me join in community this morning. I am based out of Minnesota and had the pleasure of coming to Austin in February of this year to the School Social Worker Conference. So Liz, good to be connected and to keep building, again, anti-racist practice and community. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And to begin, I want to acknowledge that where I am sitting now here in St. Paul, Minnesota, I am on traditional Dakota land. And acknowledging that is one way to show respect, to affirm Indigenous sovereignty, and to stop the erasure of Indigenous people, culture, and history. I also want to lift up George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all the other lives stolen from police brutality and state-sanctioned violence, alongside the movements for Black lives and other community uprisings that are calling us forward on a path of transformation. A few more acknowledgements to set the context for the content that we will then dive into today. I want to express my deepest gratitude to the BIPOC mentors in my life who have guided this model's development. On my lifelong journey of learning and transformation, it has been my great honor to receive consultation and guidance to ensure I wasn't a white woman off in isolation developing a model that didn't align with the broader movement for social justice. I want to also acknowledge that so much of our work is about decentering whiteness, and at the same time hold the tension that in this model we are centering it. My hope and commitment is that we're centering it differently to expose it, to study its patterns, to ultimately work to transform violent legacies of whiteness into healthy anti-racist community. And my hope and commitment for BIPOC folks who are with us on this webinar journey is that this model serves as one resource, one tool to direct us white people to go, as Resmaa Menakem says, to go get our cousins, to go get our people and do our work in our community. I also think it's important to acknowledge that recovery likely means something different to each of us. We may have had varying experiences, some of them hopeful, others more painful and difficult. Some of us may love 12-step programs, while others of us may prefer harm reduction or other healing and professional care options. So I just want to acknowledge that that's here with us on this journey as well. And lastly, Dr. Juan Carlos Arauz is one of the core mentors in my life. And I want to assert that this work, this model represents a sliver of the broad and deep work necessary for collective liberation. And so it's really positioned, as he would say, at this intrapersonal level of organizing. This idea that organizing should occur at an interpersonal level, looking inside of our own souls and minds and practices, engagement, then connecting outside of ourselves, building solidarity, paying for the emotional and intellectual labor of BIPOC leaders, healers, activists, ultimately so that we are in solidarity and fighting for institutional change. And so again, this model is really centered at this interpersonal level in the spirit of what Dr. Ken Hardy says, that we must see and be different so that we can do different. And so keeping all of that in mind, I want to offer us a Leonard Cohen lyric for how we sort of ground ourselves in this time we have together. So it reads, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." My hope is that we can allow ourselves to crack open today, shine a light around, see what resonates, see where the tensions lie, and again, host Q&A dialogue at the end of our time together. And so it's just a preview of sort of how we've laid out this time. I want to just say quickly that we're going to be gathering ourselves together, getting clear on some definitions. We'll then spend some time centering wisdom from BIPOC voices, who for centuries have been asking us as white people to look within and to fight for transformation. We'll do an overview of the actual 12 steps, and then we'll share out some of the things we've been learning in this process over the last 5 years. And like I said, my hope is that we can have rich Q&A dialogue at the end of our time. So a few agreements for how we be in this space together. Again, acknowledging that it's different, acknowledging that I can't see the chat or your faces as I would so love to. But I'll offer these as a resource for us today and in the future. I won't read all of them, but I do want to lift up a favorite from one of my mentors, Vanessa Jackson, who says, "Speak your truth, but hold my heart while you do it." And some agreements for Glenn Singleton: stay engaged, experience discomfort, expect and accept non-closure. So keeping all of that in mind, I'm going to pose a question for you to self-reflect on. And the question is, what comes to mind when you hear the term white supremacy? And so if we were together in a space, folks usually raise their hands and say things that are reflected in the next two images that are activating images, and I just am going to share them quickly. So generally folks say, I think about the KKK, I think about neo-Nazis, tiki torches. And then my next question becomes, why would I, as someone who holds values of social justice and anti-racism, ever choose to put myself, my picture here, as one of the faces of white supremacy? And I would again just ask for some self-reflection on that. While I proceed to also, and actually maybe I can try to see the chat here. Often folks say things like, well, because you have white privilege.
Christina, I can see the chat, and
Okay,
there's things coming up like the word hate, institutionalized bias and prejudice, and you are not marginalized.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Yes, so when we think about white supremacy, we often think of these very vitriolic images, and if we shift our thinking to a broader view and really center ourselves on these institutional biases, as someone mentioned, or from a system perspective, I would offer these following two definitions of white supremacy. The first is from the School of the Americas Watch and defines white supremacy as a historically based, institutionally perpetuated system of exploitation and oppression of continents, nations, and peoples of color by white peoples for the purpose of maintaining a system of wealth, power, and privilege. So really recognizing this broad systemic presence of white supremacy on a global scale. And this other definition from the Dismantling Racism organization reads that white supremacy is ever present in our institutional and cultural assumptions that assign value, morality, goodness, and humanity to the white group, while casting people and communities of color as worthless, immoral, bad, inhuman, and undeserving. So when we think about white supremacy in some ways as the centering of whiteness as normal, right, and good, my picture on this slide was an important step for me to really make an intimate connection, as painful as that was. And I want to just share 3 additional reasons that my picture is here. The first is that on my journey of learning about racism and anti-racism, years ago when I first heard BIPOC activists use the term white supremacy, my instinct was to recoil, to really say, ooh, that word is hard for me. Couldn't we say racism? Somehow that felt more palatable. And I recognized that I was running away from the work. I was extending energy to not do the work. And instead, if I could step into that tension and listen and hear and recognize that I am in fact connected to systems of white supremacy, I could commit to doing the work forward. And that has been a freedom to really live in greater alignment with my values. Second, Dr. Joseph White, the father of Black psychology, who was the Minneapolis resident and whom we lost a few years ago, talks about a healthy suspicion of white people as a psychological strength of African Americans. So really saying how brilliant it is when people of color look at my face and know that I'm not instantly worthy or instantly worthy of their trust. Looking at me in our society built around white supremacy, no one knows what's in my heart, or if I'm going to call the police on a Black woman sleeping in a dorm, or call the police on people of color barbecuing in the park. And so recognizing and honoring that tension. And lastly, I would say that my face is here to break up what Robin DiAngelo calls the most effective adaptation of racism, which is convincing us that we are either a good person and not racist, or a bad person and racist, which means then we don't talk about how good people are complicit in and perpetuate racism. And so for us in recovery, we're saying all of us are connected as white-bodied people. We are all on this spectrum of recovery. We all have work to do. No one is exempt. So no matter our age, gender, political party, years in the field, we are all on here day by day and really moment by moment, our actions are determining whether we're being more courageous and acting as an accomplice to dismantle white supremacy, or when we're regressing, slipping backwards, maybe staying silent when we should say something. And so again, putting my face there says, I'm connected, I have work to do for the rest of my life, and that I'm going to commit to doing that in community with fellow white people. And so quickly, I want to just give a quick origin story of how this model came to be. For myself, as an MSW graduate in 2008, I would say that my program taught me a lot of great things, but also treated our diversity class as a very superficial cultural competence, skill building exercise. And so we learned one week about, let's learn about Asian people this week, let's learn about Latinx people this week, but no one really challenged and cultivated in me a lifelong commitment to self-examination and interrogation related to my whiteness and connected to white supremacy, and then how I would show up in cross-racial relationships. And so as I graduated and worked as an in-home family therapist, I was working primarily with African-American and Latina mothers, and very quickly began having dreams in which we were in an alternate universe of sorts, where they were acting as my therapist, coaching me in relation to my whiteness. So saying things like, wow, Christina, I noticed that condescension in your tone, and I wonder how that's connected to white supremacy for you. I'd like you to go and reflect on that, maybe do some journaling and bring that to our next session. Let's look at that. And so over the years, I sought training. I tried to, keep pushing myself, and ultimately came across this video, which I'm happy to share with you now. Oh, and someone asked, I saw that, will we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Yes, everything will be made available to you.
That's why I wrote the piece, and I think like one of the things is that we talk about race a lot. We do, so I think it's like wrong to say, well, we don't have conversations. No, we actually talk about it quite a bit. I don't think we talk about it in depth as much as we should. And I think part of the problem is when you start talking about it in depth, when you start getting to a level where you say, listen, everything we are, everything we have isn't, is built on past sins. The things are tied. The things are tied. When you start recognizing that there's something congenital, it's as if I had a problem with alcohol, and I could say, okay, but I'm just going to go into the bar and I'm not going to have a drink. I'm going to be okay. I don't need to, have any sort of conversation. That's a different conversation than that I have to confess to the fact that I'm an alcoholic. There's something in me, that's here, and I will always have to cope with that, and I will always have to deal with that. The honesty that takes, the strength that takes, the courage that takes is pretty profound.
Okay, so I hope that, again, because this PowerPoint will be sent out, you'll have access to that link. It's a powerful interview to watch all the way through. For now, I share that clip because the moment I heard that, it really stirred inside of me this awareness for the way that recovery had been a life-saving force in the lives of people I love, and also a container for lifelong introspective work that drives transformation. So I sat down and built a derivative model based on the 12 steps of AA, and then worked with them through an intellectual property attorney to ensure we weren't infringing on their copyright. And over the years that followed, I continued to seek consultation about the model, to share it out at conferences. And in 2016, Vanessa Jackson said, Christina, I feel your heart. I had an idea, I wrote a book, go write a book. And so I sent my 3 sons to my parents' house for the weekend and wrote what I call a 72-page love letter to my people, to say we have got to love ourselves enough to face ourselves and these very violent legacies of whiteness and commit to changing them and fighting for transformation. As that model was evolving simultaneously, Minnesota continued to be ranked second worst in the nation for some of our racial disparities. So that link is there in case you're curious. But again, we often tell the story of Minnesota Nice, which is a falsehood, a false truth, in that a lot of our BIPOC siblings are suffering. And so for me, this idea of getting this idea out of my head into community to really work within, with fellow white folks to fight for social change led to the launching of our first group in January of 2018. We've been meeting weekly ever since and have started other groups across the country, which we'll hear more about at the end. So I'm now gonna shift gears a bit to, again, really center the BIPOC voices and all of the wisdom that has guided this model's development. And so I want to start by acknowledging, from a much larger view, Bell Hooks talks about imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy as the power structure underlying the social order. And I want to start there by affirming that our movements for justice and liberation must be intersectional. I want to hold that alongside the tension that in this model, we are focusing singularly on race. In part because myself as a white woman, in conversations about social justice, can often center my experience of gender oppression and not do the work about how I am on the perpetrating side of harm when it comes to matters of race. And so again, we're going to take a deep dive singularly with racial identity on this path. And so before I do, I just want to also say that I'm not here clinically diagnosing anyone, but I do think that diagnosing, for better or worse, can be helpful if it gives us language to understand the challenges that we're facing and to then plan and plot a treatment path forward, or what are we going to do to pursue transformation forward. And so some of the diagnoses that I would offer today include Dr. King talking about the nation is sick, and he was also quoted as talking about the soul sickness of white America. So for me, that's a helpful diagnosis, the soul sickness. James Baldwin said, "I'm terrified at the moral apathy, the death of the heart, which is happening in my country. These people have deluded themselves for so long that they really don't think I'm human. I base this on their conduct, not on what they say. And this means that they have become in themselves moral monsters." For me, this idea of death of the heart is also a helpful diagnosis, in that I can wake up every day and say, how am I going to ensure that my heart is alive, fully alive in the fight for racial justice? And Maya Angelou also talked about the plague of racism is insidious, entering into minds as smoothly and quietly as floating microbes enter into bodies to find lifelong purchase in bloodstreams. And as a quick aside, a quick detour, I want to also acknowledge that in 1946, Albert Einstein said that the separation of the races is not a disease of colored people, but a disease of white people. I do not intend to be quiet about it. And so again, thinking of this, this plague, this death of the heart, this soul sickness, when we think about how we might treat that and move forward, I want to offer this wisdom from Toni Cade Bambara, who said, "Revolution begins with the self, in the self. We better take the time to fashion revolutionary selves, revolutionary lives, revolutionary relationships." And I would also offer from Paulo Freire this assertion that no one can be authentically human while preventing others from being so. And this is about as close as we've come to a slogan for the work that we do. On our business cards, it says, "Reclaim your full humanity." So truly, how are we calling in other white people on this journey of building anti-racist practice and community in order to reclaim our core humanness? And lastly, before we get to the actual 12 steps, I want to share a Native American prayer that I think is important for grounding us in this work. But I want to quickly share the story of how it came into my life. And It was a few years ago at one of our recovery group meetings where one of our members was talking about trying to explain this group to a Native American in her life, really struggling to find the words, saying, we're a group of white people gathering to like look inside and then show up differently. And she couldn't quite, put it together. And he said, oh, no, I get it. It's a group for white people to save themselves from themselves. And he proceeded to pull out this prayer and share with her. I'll read it now. Prayer for the white man. And now, grandfather, I ask you to bless the white man. He needs your wisdom, your guidance. You see, for so long, he has tried to destroy my people and only feels comfortable when given power. Bless them, show them the peace we understand, teach them humility. For I fear they will someday destroy themselves and their children as they have done so Mother Earth. I plead, I cry, after all they are my brothers. This member also went on to just say how deeply this had affected her heart and also caused her to recognize the depth of his compassion alongside the way that she or we as white people often, point out all the things that other white people are doing wrong without really saying there's something in all of us. It will always be there. We always have to cope with it, and to really invite people onto this path and build community forward. And so keeping all of that in our minds and hearts as we move forward with the content presentation and ultimately again get to the Q&A today, we've now arrived at the moment where we're going to look at the actual 12 steps that we're using in this group practice. And as I said before, it's a derivative model based on the 12 steps of AA. Before we get to the first step, I want to again acknowledge that we're drawing from the strengths of recovery as a container for lifelong work, held in community that is grounded in accountability and love. And so this from SAMHSA is saying recovery emerges from hope, is person-driven, is holistic, etc. And so here we go, step one. You're going to hear voices from core group members who've been on this journey for a while as representing the collective that we're trying to build.
Step one, we admitted that we had been socially conditioned by the ideology of white supremacy, that our minds were subject to racial biases, often unconsciously so. The first step to any kind of recovery is admitting that we have a problem. Individuals not ready to acknowledge a problem may be unable to pursue and receive the help they need. Becoming aware of a problem and admitting it to others can be challenging, but it is a fundamental step on the recovery journey.
And so to really drive home the spirit of step one, I'm going to share a video clip, and then I will try to maneuver my way to the chat if folks have reflections and observations about what you notice in this video.
So show me the smart child. Okay, why is she the smart child?
Because she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the mean child. Okay, why is she the mean child?
Because she's way darker.
Okay. Show me the good child. Why is she the good child?
Because I think she looks like me.
Okay. Show me the bad child. Why is she the bad child?
Because she's a lot darker.
Show me the ugly child. Why is she the ugly child?
Because she's like a lot darker.
What do you think? Shocking to you?
I just think it's because she's not exposed. I mean,
You're almost near tears. Why? It's not meant to upset you. What's upsetting you?
it's not really upsetting. I mean, I mean, everything she said, she chose someone like her because she's smart, and she is.
All the good attributes. She's got a
Yeah.
healthy ego. That looks like
And
me.
as
That kid
far-
like me.
And as far as the one she chose for, being ugly or mean, I mean, you can't even see any facial features in that one. But she has never asked about any, color. As far as, I mean, when she plays with friends, and when we were talking about, we were actually going to soccer, where there's all different kinds of people there, and that's when she says, I chose the dark one as the one that was mean. I think that was an eye opener for me, because we've never really talked about race, so we talked a long time about it.
So Christina, we are getting some comments in the chat. The video was upsetting. Someone says awesome. Someone says, I've experienced racism too many times to count. As a Black mother, this never gets easier to watch. This is similarly internalized by our Black children. It makes us so sad. And this video is still so sad and powerful. And then someone noticing there's so much fear to acknowledge the existence and depth of these issues. Emotional. It's what's most hurtful is to see the reversal of this video. And it is sad.
Yeah, I appreciate. I'm reading the comments, and we'll read them in greater depth when we're done as well. I appreciate the folks who've lifted up the fact that the Dahl test, used to in 1954 and supporting Brown versus Board of Education, the reversal of this using Black children and showing the ways that they too have internalized all of these very toxic messages. It's important to know that. It's important to watch. I think Curie Davis's video, A Girl Like Me, a few years ago, where she replicated the Dahl test with really strikingly similar results. And my choice to show this little white child is to, again, really center the soul sickness of white people, to say that even if you are battling, this empathic lapse, even if you don't care about someone outside of yourself, please look inside of your own home and look at your own child and recognize that there are toxins, there are toxic messages we're passing on to these children at a very early age. And it doesn't require us sitting down and consciously telling them to choose who's good and bad, but it is ingrained in all of us. We are socially conditioned to believe and to, again, uplift the humanity of white people while categorizing people of color as inferior, worth less, and inhuman. So my hope is that it's a call to action for white folks to say, this is in us and we're passing this on and we can change that legacy. I appreciated folks who also mentioned the mother's reactions. They saw the tears and maybe the shame. For me, what strikes me every time is that there's a moment where she allows herself to go to this place of feeling, of being like upset and ashamed and sad, and to really cry, but then quickly button that back up to this place of rationalizing, defending. And I want to acknowledge that white women's tears can be very problematic and violent. And at the same time, I do believe that the path to transformation is getting out of our heads. And as Ken Hardy says, traveling the farthest distance for white people to travel, from our heads to our hearts, and to really feel this and to feel the grief and the heartache and to cry, instead of, again, just going to this place of denial and rationalization. I think folks also said, wow, she's so young. Again, we are indoctrinated from the moment of our birth, even preceding our birth. There are ways that our race shapes how we experience the world. So step one is about acknowledging that. It's here, it's in us, it will be there, we have work to do. And so to really close out that spirit, I want to also share wisdom from Sonia Renee Taylor, who is a Black author that I hope you all go and follow on Instagram and invest in her work. She says, you are struggling in this system as well. it is killing you too. Whiteness is not about you. Whiteness is the structure into which you were born. Stop experiencing the conversation of whiteness and white supremacist delusion as who you are, and start experiencing it as something that you were assigned that is not serving you, that you wish to remove elements of it from your life on a regular basis. So step one, it's here. It will always be here. We have work to do.
Step 2, we came to believe that we could embrace our ignorance as an invitation to learn. We acknowledge that we as white people will never know what it feels like to walk in the world as a person of color. We embrace our not knowing as a powerful reminder of our ongoing need for new learning, and we abandon white supremacist traditions of knowing how others should feel, think, and act.
So step 2, I often ask audiences, and again, this is challenging in our Zoom world, to raise their hands if you have someone in your network who says things like, I just don't understand why Black Lives Matter has to protest on the highways. Right, we're gonna get a lot of hands raised. Yeah, almost all of us have people who say that. And when comments like that are made in a spirit of condescension and judgment, there often isn't an openness for new learning. And yet, if we start from that same place of not fully understanding or our own ignorance, but with an openness, with a sense of, gosh, I don't have something in my lived experience that tells me I would risk my life and get on the highway and disrupt business as usual. And what might that be? And how am I going to learn about that? The starting point is often the same. There's things we don't know, and the ways that then we open ourselves and commit to learning forever is serving in some ways as one of the spiritual foundations of this work.
Step 3, we developed support systems to keep us engaged in this work. We are aware that facing and recovering from the effects of white supremacist conditioning will involve difficult, sometimes painful moments. We will commit to developing practices that facilitate self-care to ensure that we are gentle with ourselves while also bravely able to confront the dehumanizing ideology of white supremacy.
Yeah, so I've underlined the words to keep us engaged in this work. So step 3 is about building support systems so that when we mess up in this work, which we inevitably will, we don't just retreat to our couches and watching Project Runway, but that we're going to stay engaged for the rest of our lives, and we have people and practices we can rely on to keep us holding our humanity sacred while committing to accountability and repairing harm as we go. And so the spirit of step 3 is sort of echoed in this quote from Max Ehrmann: "Be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars."
Step 4. We journeyed boldly inward, exploring and acknowledging ways in which white supremacist teachings have been integrated into our minds and spirits. After acknowledging the problem, we must also acknowledge that it has impacted many areas of our lives, consciously and unconsciously. Each of us must explore ways, past and present, in which the ideology of white supremacy has negatively impacted us, our understanding of history, our social networks, and our patterns of interacting with people of color, with an emphasized focus on microaggressions.
So step 4, the parallel in AA, is a fearless and searching moral inventory. So really taking this very deep dive inside of ourselves. And this is a sample step 4 worksheet that a person could do to really examine the role and presence of whiteness in various areas of our life. And I want to offer this slide that has definitions of microaggressions. I won't read them all now, but I want to make note that Vanessa Jackson has said, "I'm so done calling them microaggressions because they hurt. These are aggressions, invalidations, assaults, and insults." So I would offer again that tension of knowing sometimes it's helpful, as we've learned about microaggressions, but to keep in mind the real impact of these in daily life for people of color. And again, step 4 is getting real about that, right? Really looking in and saying, oh my gosh, I do that thing. I do it in particular when I'm feeling this way, and really committing to that lifelong self-study.
Step 5, we confessed our mistakes and failings to ourselves and others. Beyond identifying ways in which our thinking, feeling, and relating have been impacted by white supremacist conditioning, honestly addressing the actions that have emerged from that conditioning is a separate, necessary step. Confessing past and ongoing microaggressions to a group and receiving support is an essential part of recovery.
Yeah. So step 5, for me, just reminds me of wisdom from Dr. Ken Hardy, who says, this is not a spectator sport. Silence is the most disappointing. We're going to have skin in the game. And so in so doing, we know that we're going to make mistakes. We can work to reduce and minimize harm, but harm is human. And so step 5 is about getting real about our mistakes and then committing to being accountable for repairing them. And so again, step 5, confess you were wrong yesterday. It will show you are wiser today.
Step 6. We were entirely ready to deconstruct previous ways of knowing as they had been developed through the lens of white supremacy. After admitting these problems, white supremacist conditioning and related actions, it is then time to let go of knowledge developed in isolation from people of color.
So step 6, the spirit is, what if I told you it's okay to change your opinion based on new information? So just really recognize that we need to deconstruct so much of the ways that we've learned about our world, our history, other cultures, and break that down so that we're ready then to move on to step 7.
Step 7. We humbly explored new ways of understanding, proactively seeking out new learning and reconstructing a more inclusive sense of reality. This step involves mindfully and intentionally engaging in learning to more deeply understand the experience of people of color in a society organized around white supremacy. This type of learning can take place in a variety of ways, including reading texts written by people of color, actively listening to the experiences of people of color, patronizing businesses owned by people of color, etc.
And so this next slide is like the tiniest list. This could be pages and pages of, again, just really recognizing if we break down what we have learned and the ways that our world has been narrow, we can expand ourselves and really seek out new learning and commit to doing that for the rest of our lives. And so that's the spirit of step 7.
Step 8, we committed ourselves to ongoing study of our racial biases, conscious or unconscious, and our maladaptive patterns of white supremacist thinking. This step is about identifying our triggers to negative thoughts or other stereotypes, positive or negative, about people of color. We remain curious about the source of our thoughts, fears, and assumptions, and perpetually aware of their existence.
So in a process that can be similar to step 4, we're committing to this ongoing deep dive inside of ourselves. And similar to how we might support someone battling depression in tracking automatic negative thoughts that come up, what are the situations that really precede that, and how distressed you become. Step 8 is getting real about all of the ways that stereotypes and patterns of microaggressions come alive for us. And one of our members says step 8 is such a slimy step. Like if we're really doing that raw and honestly, it feels unpleasant, it feels uncomfortable, and we are committed to it in the spirit of what James Baldwin said, that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.
Step 9. We develop strategies to counteract our racial biases. Developing positive associations to counter negative thoughts is an important proactive strategy in recovery from white conditioning. We believe that a powerful way to develop positive associations is through authentic relationships with people of color. In lieu of such relationships, we can still engage in daily proactive practices to retrain our brain from the ill effects of white supremacist conditioning.
So if we're using, again, the example of depression and really tracking those automatic negative thoughts, we're committed to building up new associations in our mind to really shift how we understand and move in the world and how we treat people. And so the good news about step 9 is that we're learning more and more about neuroplasticity, about the ways that we can change neural pathways and networks. So the spirit of, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, we can go cultivate again those new associations. And so one example that a group member shares is just when she's driving through our downtown area where there are many BIPOC folks. In the middle of the day, she's waving out of her window, not actually disrupting them, not saying aloud to them, but sort of quietly aloud to herself. Hello, my brother. Hello, my sister. Hello, my sibling. Hello, my brother. Hello, my sister. Hello, my sibling. The sense of I have got to cultivate new associations, again, without disrupting anyone's day.
Step 10, we embrace the responsibility of focusing on our impact more than our intentions and interactions with people of color. Taking responsibility for the impact of our actions is an ongoing part of recovery. If we fall back into perpetuating white supremacist ideology or defending actions that have caused hurt to people of color, it is important to stop and admit it. Prioritizing impact instead of explaining the intent of our behavior, i.e., I didn't mean to offend you, is essential for attending to the human being in front of us.
Yes, so like Ken Hardy says, intentions are the province of the privileged. That's where we often want to live, right? Oh, I didn't mean it, you misunderstood me. That feels more comfortable than really acknowledging harm that we've done and tending to that is the most important first step. So step 10 is committing to never again prioritize our own comfort over another human being suffering who's telling us, you caused me harm.
Step 11. We engaged in daily practices of self-reflection. Reflecting on the day, on moments in which we confronted our own white supremacist conditioning, and on moments in which we were still bound by its limiting beliefs, is an investment in our recovery. Relevant spiritual practices may play a helpful role in this step, as a way to encourage us towards continued growth and connection beyond our mistakes.
So step 11 is really an opportunity to take stock of a day's worth of growing, knowing that this is forever and always a journey and not a destination that we arrive at and then check the box of completing the requirements, that we are on this journey forever, again, holding our humanity sacred, but committing to growing and being accountable and being in solidarity with BIPOC communities.
Step 12. We committed ourselves to sharing this message with our white brothers, sisters, and siblings in order to build a supportive recovery community and to encourage personal accountability within our culture every day. Assisting others to seek help in recovery from white supremacist conditioning and in becoming an ally with people of color is a core component of recovery. Working with future recovery from white conditioning groups is a common choice for this step.
Yeah, so I would offer here that Resmaa Menakem, the author of My Grandmother's Hands, he speaks often of how the KKK has us beat. When we think about well-intentioned white folks and the KKK, he says the Ku Klux Klan has vibrant communities. They have rules of admonishment, songs, rituals, traditions, heroes there's community, there's people supporting each other. And so his question to us as white folks is, what does healthy, vibrant, white anti-racist community look like? And for me, step 12 is really rooted in that spirit of, in order to keep recovery, you have to share it. And so Audre Lorde in that spirit had said, when people of color are expected to educate white people as to their humanity, the oppressors maintain their position and evade their responsibility for their own actions. And like most things I've shared today, there is of course a tension here in that, as I said earlier, white people do need to seek out and invest in learning from BIPOC leaders, healers, trainers. We can't do this work just in isolation. And at the same time, we have access to our families, our communities, our circles of white people, and we can practice this sense of recovery in a sponsorship-like way almost, about, I've been where you've been, I used to think that way too, can I share what I'm learning? Can we go get coffee? I'd love to share how I'm trying to better practice being in right relationship and living in anti-racist ways. So this idea of go build that community with fellow white people is the spirit of step 12. So we did it, we made it through the 12 steps. This next slide is a quick snapshot of how this model comes to life on any given evening. We begin with a sort of equivalent to the Serenity Prayer by reading these words aloud together. We are here to be fully human to ourselves, fully accountable to each other. And to each other, we're speaking about our BIPOC siblings. That saying was blessed for us to use by Shailja Patel, a Kenyan author. We then proceed with reading a welcome statement, doing a round of introductions. We share announcements about upcoming actions or protests or phone banks or trainings that we should know about. We pass the calendar when we're live together because we have a rotating facilitator model. There's no one expert in the room. There's a community of folks coming to hold each other and to use the structure and discipline of this 12-step program to do the work. We then host a minute of silence to center our hearts and minds on the lived experiences of our brothers, sisters, and siblings of color and Indigenous people who have endured centuries of racial terror in this country. And we then do a quick reading about a white anti-racist who's gone before us as motivation to take real risks and fight for social change in tangible ways. We then proceed with reading aloud the 12 steps. So just going around one by one, reading a step. We then turn to the step of the day and read the chapter in our text. And then the heart of the meeting on Zoom, we can break out into smaller groups. But the heart of the meeting is this uninterrupted time for each member to speak or pass. So members are sharing what resonated with them in the step for the day, what they're striving for, what they're struggling with. Again, really just holding our own work and being committed to that. We have back and forth dialogue that happens after the meeting, but during the meeting, we're committed to disrupting this pattern where we as white people are often listening not to really support and understand each other, but to respond and to like critique. So again, we're holding ourselves and our accountability for the work. We then, once everyone has shared, we come back together, read a closing statement, repeat the call to recovery. And then people do often linger on the call after to say, hey, you said this thing and I was curious about it, or could you share that resource with me? And so that's generally what a meeting looks like. In terms of, in our final few minutes here before we get to the Q&A, I want to just say that we have all of our materials uploaded for free download on our website in a spirit of take what you like and leave the rest. We've had groups operating in the community with folks just gathering and finding each other in a community way. And we've also had agencies host a 12-step process for their employees. And so that has happened at mental health agencies, schools, places of worship, and one county corrections department. There were 5 corrections officers who said, look, we don't think the county is ready for this, but we want to spend our lunch hour gathering and holding ourselves accountable to looking within and to studying our biases and to pursuing transformation in our lives. So again, the model is flexible. It can be applied, in a 12-week series. It can be once a month. It involves this rotating facilitator. And many folks come and attend one of our meetings 1 or 2 times and then really take the materials and launch their own group in the spirit of in AA, where it's said that 2 people equals a meeting. So as long as there's someone else to go on the journey with folks, where you're encouraging them to go build that anti-racist community in their lives. And I think it's important to share also some of the actual actions that are emerging from this self-study process, because this isn't just about our growth as white-bodied folks. It's about how are we working on transformation to, again, show up as accomplices in dismantling white supremacy. And so I'm happy to share some more of those in the Q&A as well, but some of the ones I would just lift up quickly here include just this notion that the thing I hear most in our group meetings is, I'm saying this thing because I want to be accountable to going and doing something about it. And I'm going to report back to you next week how that goes. So really using the group as an accountability partner in the work. Also for the individual step work, our 4th step meeting, one of our, a social worker who works with judges to really evaluate and determine sentencing guidelines, said that the more that I do my 4th step work and really study deeply and become aware of my biases, I'm having fundamentally different conversations with judges as a result of coming and committing to doing this group work week after week. For the 7th step, I would offer quickly that one of our members, in learning about the cultural resilience framework from Dr. Juan Carlos Arauz, really began recognizing the cultural expertise and brilliance of colleagues of hers who were people of color, but whose language had been stolen centuries prior, who were then unable to be qualified for the bilingual pay differential at her agency. And so again, by seeking out that learning, by shifting her perspective, she was advocating with her colleagues to ultimately ensure that specifically African-American colleagues working in a culturally specific program were eligible for a cultural expertise salary increase. So again, the sense of if we get out of our narrow views and if we expand and listen and learn and partner, we can build and fight for social change together. I'm going to go ahead and just again say that all of our materials are available for free download. I'm committed to, not profiting a cent off of this work. This is my sole work that I need to do within myself and in my community. And so any proceeds from any of the book sales on our website go directly to BIPOC-led organizations fighting for racial justice. You're welcome to also contact us through the website for further dialogue and questions. And there are some group meetings happening across the country that anyone is available to join. So you're welcome to email those folks and request the Zoom link and then hop in to a weekly meeting. So before we get to Q&A, I see you, Liz, on the screen. Good to see you again. I want to just share these 2 final quotes that I think have popped up recently in my life, and I'm holding on to them closely. From Dwayne Reed, this idea that white supremacy won't die until white people see it as a white issue they need to solve rather than a Black issue they need to empathize with. And I think this really classic piece of wisdom of the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself, and it's the only way forward. So there we go. Thank you so much for listening and hearing about this work we've been doing over the last 5 years. I'm really happy to receive all of the questions because again, I know there's a lot of tension in the work and I'm happy to be in community with you holding that together.
Thank you so much, Christina, for your powerful presentation. We have a number of questions that have come in, as well as some great comments in the chat. I'm going to start with a question. Not knowing much about the 12-step model, Do you see these steps as a ladder or more of steps to cycle through? And are there certain points where you have found yourself or other white people get stuck?
Yeah, great question. We are blessed again to draw from the strengths of recovery in other models, in the sense of it doesn't have to be sequential. So you can join at step 7 and you can come back at step 10. And our biggest message is keep coming back. The program works if you work it. We're so glad you're here. I do think to really deepen our work, there is value, especially in steps 1 through 3, to really build a solid foundation, to be sure that we're accepting that this is in us, that we're acknowledging that we've moved beyond denial, and really building that spiritual foundation to stay committed for the long haul. But truly, folks are popping in, coming when they can, and knowing that there's this community of folks who are going to hold them whenever they're ready to courageously and necessarily really face ourselves and change those generational patterns. I would say there was a question about where people get stuck. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think any given week, some of us, we can be more or less courageous. So sometimes I don't think there's a particular step, but I think, are we really going to go there and be raw and vulnerable, or are we going to stay a little bit more in our heads and superficial? And so I think that's a risk. But what we have found is that for folks who are on fire for this work and are committed and are modeling like this, keep coming back, and this is how I'm doing my work, we've found that newcomers are able to sort of glean from them and build relationship with them and reach out if they do get stuck.
Another question related to the process, I would say, is do you have sponsors in this program?
Yeah, great question. Because we were so new, we didn't have sponsors available. So what we instead adopted was just this sense of partnership, that we all as white-bodied folks, again, are on this lifelong journey, and that we do want to have people with whom we can do that important relational work like sponsors offer in AA and Al-Anon. And so while we don't call them sponsors, we do think of that same spirit of inviting people into deep relationships, to know that you can call this person on the phone list one time when something goes awry and you really need that support and accountability, or you could say, hey, will you be my partner on this journey, and let's meet every Sunday to really study our steps. So I hope that answers the question.
And then this is a question I'm sure that comes up. Are these meetings open to BIPOC attendees?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I would say about that is we piloted it at a local agency 2 years ago. Specifically, they were asking for this model to be used with white staff as they were building an accountability group to run parallel to the BIPOC affinity group. And as the white-bodied group got started, the BIPOC staff said, we want to know what the heck they're doing, what they're reading, and we would like to also look within and see how white supremacy has affected us, how this conditioning and being raised in this culture has affected our own souls. And as that journey proceeded separately, but using the materials, the BIPOC group ultimately concluded that it was very triggering to use material written so explicitly for white folks, and that a more radical healing space was what they were desiring. So there's a beautiful radical healing model that Dr. Brianna French and some other folks created toward a psychological framework of radical healing for communities of color. And so I think that's what they're using instead, to really say survivors of harm deserve a different experience than perpetrators of harm who need to look within and be accountable. I do think the question of, well, can we use it also to look at ourselves and see where it applies or doesn't apply? There was some work done by a woman of color director who led that agency to sort of change some of the language and to talk more about white supremacy versus white people, to make it a little bit more palatable, but it was kind of clunky and really just not intended for the survivors of harm.
Very good. Thank you. So now we have a question that you may have addressed a little bit. Someone who's involved in a racial disparity group discussions on a military installation. Some are mandatory, others are voluntary. How would you implement these steps with such a moving target group? And I suppose that goes back to the fact that people come in and out as they're able to, as they're feeling the need to. Would that be the case with that sort of a group?
Yeah, I'm sorry, at the beginning it was cutting out a little bit. Was there something about a military?
Yes, someone who's involved in a racial disparity group discussions on a military installation.
Okay.
And some are voluntary, some are mandatory.
Yes, got it. Yeah, I would say that that also has been sort of a spectrum of implementation of this model, that based on the intimate working knowledge of agencies or communities, folks have said either this is what the white-bodied staff are required to do, and we're going to use this, and everyone participates, just like we're all mandated to go to certain trainings. You're going to come here, and you're, again, a woman of color director said, if you're a white person working with my community, you have to do this internal soul work within yourself. So we're going to try out a round of the 12 steps. That's mandatory, and beyond that, it can be optional. In other cases, agencies, staff within them have said, oh, you know, we don't know if people are ready. We'd like to just get it started and not wait for formal approval. So optional is always a way. And what I would say, no matter what, a loved one of mine who's in AA says, you know, you come the first 3 years to really master and learn this, but beyond that, you come for the newcomers. Like, you keep coming back so that when newcomers are finding their way in, there are people who've been doing it long enough who can hold and support and encourage them. So I would say as long as there's, you know, 2 or 3 people who are on fire willing to hold that space, it can really look a variety of ways. And I would trust sort of instincts and knowledge about the individual circumstance and what was more likely to be effective at calling people in.
We do have a couple of questions that I'm going to put together where people are asking about the 12-step idea of making amends. And in steps 8 and 9 in the original 12-step are about making amends.
Yep.
The adapted versions of 8 and 9 don't explicitly mention amends. So how does making amends fit into this model?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an important question. I think in the development of the model, you know, the BIPOC consultants with whom, you know, I was seeking feedback from, aligned with also folks from the AA and Al-Anon world. Also, we were really talking about that one amend, one important and powerful amend is changed behavior. And so that is really how step 8 and 9 are sort of centered about being fundamentally different of how we're going to show up. We're going to commit to developing strategies to show up differently in the world. And from that place, we are, and I would say this is true in our years of doing the group, that the folks who are coming are also like supportive and clear on initiatives to support reparations, land back initiatives. Like, if you're doing that soul work inside of yourself and committing to changing your behavior and really staying humble and focused on racial justice in your life, then the hope and commitment is that you're also going to give back in macro level ways, and also by changing inside of yourself.
I am going to highlight a question. You mentioned that white women crying can be violent to BIPOC folks. Can you elaborate on this? And what's the safest way to practice step 5 without passion, is the way the question is worded.
So I'll answer the first question you asked, and then it cut out again a little bit. So,
okay.
So first things first. So as a white woman, often when we're first learning about racism, right, and we're in often a space with BIPOC folks, and we're at a training and someone's talking about the violent legacies of white supremacy in our country, and we haven't been aware of it our whole life, and we have like shame and guilt and sadness about it, we often will take the mic and start crying and say, well, I didn't know this, or I didn't, and really just center ourselves, and in some ways then ask BIPOC folks to like reassure and care for us. I think that's a very common contemporary reality. And so my commitment is that in spaces with us as white folks, as the perpetrators of harm, we can get to that heart place to really feel all those things, but to not insist that BIPOC friends have to comfort us or reassure us that we're good people. On a more direct, clear way, I think just this idea of white women being rescued from Emmett Till, right? The violence of a white woman crying or lying that Emmett Till, had accosted her, and the ways that then whiteness mobilizes to protect her and to kill and murder and terrorize BIPOC folks. So this sense of like our innocence, our like sadness, our need for protection often has done both egregious physical harm as well as this emotional harm and this desire for centering ourselves and being cared for instead of really building the muscles, which this group is about. Let's build those muscles. Let's cry together if we need to, let's feel, and then let's show up with a greater will and skill and discernment about how and when we, share parts of our stories in those cross-racial relationships. And so part 2 of the question was about step 5, is that right?
Yes, I've been reading some other questions. Let's see. Oh, what is the, excuse me, part of this is my voice. What is the safest way to practice step 5 without taking up too much space and still offering yourself compassion? So I think you may have addressed that in talking about doing the work in the group and then going out into the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think the context and thinking about who we're with and what we're asking or expecting of them. A lot of our members say, I come here to bring my mistakes because when I tell other white people in my life, they offer me reassurance of like, oh, no, you're still a good person. No, you're being too hard on yourself. And folks say, no, like, I did this thing again, and I need to say that, and I need to change that behavior. So I'm saying it here in my step 5 meeting. I had one other thought, but I would also just say, I think step 5 is also part of building this vision forward where we can call in more white folks. Often we want to point out other people's mistakes. And again, as white people ourselves, we are not exempt from making mistakes or doing this work and fumbling. And so as is said in other recovery groups, this idea when you point at someone else, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you. So for me, step 5, when I'm humble and I recognize my own mistakes, then it also helps me better connect with someone newer to this journey of learning about racism and racial justice. And I can say, oh man, yep, I've had some of those experiences and I made this mistake. And then I've learned that I could do it differently. And I'd love to share that with you.
There was a couple of questions have come in from folks who may have missed the very beginning. And could you mention again about who created the model? She says, they say there's a book by Dr. M.
Oh, yeah, I'm not familiar with the work of Dr. M. What I would say is that in the fall of 2014, again, when I saw that Ta-Nehisi Coates video, I sat at my computer and built this particular 12-step model of recovery from white conditioning, and then retained an intellectual property attorney to sort of scan the landscape and be sure we weren't infringing on other people's work. And then again, sought lots of consultation from BIPOC mentors in my life, paid for consultation to be sure that the way we were asking white folks to come together and grow was in alignment with the broader movement for social justice.
Someone's asking another question about kind of context for the work, and this is someone who I'm thinking is a social worker, and they're asking, often we work in environments in which we are the only social workers on staff. How do you envision this model being applied outside of the profession? And I want to take note here that this particular presentation was promoted pretty widely So there may be people, many people here who are outside of the social work profession or helping professions. Christina, would you want to talk about that, how that might work differently in those groups?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, what first comes to mind is that I'm aware that this isn't like white privilege 101. It's not necessarily accessible to everyone. Like for folks who haven't learned about racism, my hope is that if they showed up, we would hold community, we would hold space for them and welcome them into this journey. But I do recognize also that many of the people doing the work are on fire for racial justice and are on this journey of activism also. So in that way, my hope is that if we are the only social worker in a setting, that we could open it to anyone who wants to participate. I also think there's value in finding community of folks who will keep challenging us as well. So there's a large school district in Minnesota where the 60 social workers from across the district are all going to gather to do this work. And at the same time, there are folks who are saying, I'm bringing this to my family. Like, we're going to start on this journey. My grandma has never heard these terms, but we're going to do it. And we're going to like hold each other with love and care and with this commitment that we have got to change how we show up as white people in the world. So my hope is to find some level of, again, at least one other person who can walk the path with you in a spirit of accountability and love.
Very good. A lot of people are asking about many meetings in Austin, and oh, it says my internet was unstable. Oh dear.
No, we can hear you now. It froze
okay,
for
good.
a moment.
I want to take this moment to share that I have been participating in a group that exists on the West Coast, and that Christina reached out to me about. Christina presented at our school social workers conference, our Texas Social Worker Conference back in February, and we've remained in touch. And so I've been participating in a group, and we're at step 7, and I'm finding it very powerful. And I'm happy to talk with folks who are interested in starting a group here. And most of you have my email address. So
I think we lost Liz. You said most of you have my email address, and so I'm going to assume you would say contact me if you're interested in starting.
Yes, yes. I'll just leave it there. Well, there is one more thing I want to say and hope I stay. My husband seems to be doing so. He's doing a session on the internet in the other room. Oh my goodness. Okay, so the person who started the group on the West Coast said that she would also be happy to talk with people, to communicate with people about her process in getting a group started.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, Madeline. Oh, there you go. I see a lot of people stating that they dislike the micro in front of microaggressions. I think the misconception is that using the word micro and microaggressions indicate that they're less harmful, hurtful, or detrimental, when in reality, it means that interactions are occurring on the individual level. Taking away the micro also takes away the power from the definition and from people of color, because they are specific interactions that happen between white people of power and people of color. Any thoughts?
Well, what is most on my mind and heart to say is, again, I appreciate the question and the engagement with this material, and knowing that our sort of concepts and language is ever evolving. I think the earlier, decades ago research on racial microaggressions is important or has been helpful for many of us learning again that this isn't about, is there macro level separate drinking fountains that are institutionalized, but are there these ongoing, really, again, very harmful, incessant, individual level harms that are happening. And so for me, again, Vanessa had said, I'm done calling them micro because they just hurt. And also if people find the term microaggression helpful to understand exactly what we mean and the precise, the power relationship that was referenced in that question, then again, I think we're holding that term with the tension of acknowledging that it has been helpful in helping us understand how they occur, but for some folks it feels like a minimization when in fact it was a specificity of context. So I don't know if I answered the question, but again, I appreciate the multidimensional sort of impact of our language.
We have a logistics kind of question. Are there advised size limit for groups, whether in person or virtual, to ensure people get time to share if they'd like?
Yeah, great question. In our experience, we can really hold as much as a physical space or a Zoom meeting space will allow. And that is built around the sense of spending the first time together, reading the welcome statement, doing our rituals to ground us in the space, and reading the step of the day. And then when it is time for uninterrupted turns to share, we do then separate into smaller groups. We've generally found that for this to be an hour-long meeting, groups of about 8 to 10 for those small groups is usually about sort of the sweet spot. But again, that would depend on physical space limits and also if you have a whole bunch of newcomers who are going to say, I pass, I pass, I pass. Sometimes we've made it work with about 12 or 13 folks in a small group.
People are asking for contact information for those who are willing to talk about setting up a group, and that will be in the PowerPoint that we'll share. So that, and it's also on Christina's website at all times. So you'll be able to find that information there.
Yeah, and I would just echo that if you contact us through the Recovery from White Conditioning website, saying I'd like to start a group and would like some support or guidance, we will be responsive and are thankful to be in community with you as we share some of the nuts and bolts learning of what we've been doing, as well as really some of the deeper spiritual learnings that we've acquired along the way.
And this is another sort of nuts and bolt question. This is from a person who isn't a social worker or a mental health professional, but is on a diversity, inclusion, belonging team for a corporation. And they don't have anyone on staff as trained facilitators. So does this organization provide training to prepare non-professionals for facilitating? Would you like to answer that?
Yes. Yeah, well, what I can say is historically, when we've launched groups within organizations, I've generally come and just done an overview of the model like we did here today. And then sometimes we spend the next hour practicing a first step meeting. And again, if it's a mixed race audience, a colleague of mine who's a person of color comes and we separate into racial caucus groups. So there's a healing space for BIPOC folks. And again, this accountability group space for white people to experience a first step meeting. So historically, I'm open, or if folks want to call and say, I'd love to sort of have this model shared at my agency and or just some guidance in practicing a first step meeting. I do think that the most sustainable way is to just sort of come join one of our existing weekly meetings, really see and feel the pulse of how it's structured, and then any support we can offer in launching your own group is something we're more than happy to provide. Again, being very clear that any consultation fees always go only to BIPOC folks if they're co-facilitating and hosting that healing space, and that any consultation fees that would go to us as white-bodied folks be directed instead to organizations fighting for racial justice that are led by BIPOC community members.
Someone asked a question about, did I read the question from somebody previously, so I think I better read that one. Can you repeat the name or what was referenced with regard to cultural competency and cultural fluency and how that has informed this work?
Cultural competency. I don't remember. You said cultural fluency?
Cultural competency and cultural fluency, and how that has informed this work.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I am not.
We need some clarification.
Yes, more clarification would be great. Yes. Oh, I think I know. Maybe the cultural expertise.
Yes.
Dr. Juan Carlos Arauz. So his organization is E3, Education, Excellence, Equity. And he has some beautiful tools to support educators, but that really apply to all of us, including an educational strengths assessment tool, where students' strengths are mirrored back to them, and particularly students from marginalized community, where the tool lifts up their innovation, adaptability, cross-cultural communication, critical analysis, and teamwork as these important 21st century skills that Fortune 500 companies are seeking. And so again, when one of our members really learned about that, they thought, oh my gosh, these are skills. Like this person in particular was talking about her African-American colleagues and saying, all of that emotional mental gymnastics and code switching, there is a labor there that is worthy of a salary increase, much like our bilingual folks are reimbursed in a significantly different, or, it's a notable difference at her particular agency. So I think that's maybe what the question was coming from. And again, Dr. Juan Carlos Arauz, e3ed.org.
And I'm going to put together a couple of questions that have come from someone who's been a member of other 12-step programs, has found daily readers and meditations very helpful. And then someone else who's asking for other resources and books and podcasts. Actually, this is kind of a different slant. White counselor in training who's beginning to work with BIPOC teens and kids in a school setting, school counseling setting.
The first part about meditations and sort of other daily readings that might be helpful, thank you for the question, because it's a great plug to say that we are hoping that as this model evolves, and we hope that it will be strengthened by a broader collective of voices giving life to it. So we hope to eventually next year write a second edition of the text and really again enhance our language further to be even more anti-oppressive, and to integrate in some ways examples of how people are working individual steps. So members share their experience, strength, and hope. We would love to have a broader toolkit and resources available. And for the person who's looking for those resources, I think we have some listed on our website. There's a lot of great stuff out there. I think, again, this group affords a commitment to say, as I'm going to embark on this lifelong learning, I have to be really clear that this is my soul work to do. And the more that I'm clear and grounded in that, then when I am afforded these opportunities, I will grasp them and hold them with even greater care and commitment. So I really invite both a coming to the group and also a continued seeking out and grabbing those opportunities and investing and paying for the intellectual and emotional labor of BIPOC folks.
Thank you so much, Christine. We've reached the top of to express my gratitude for your time today and for your sharing. I have a feeling we're going to get a lot of response, and we should be seeing some other groups. And I just wanted to express my appreciation for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. We can fight to see and be different, so we do different. We can show up differently and fight together. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share this very much heart-based work.
Thank you. We will be sending out for CEUs, and for anyone who would like to provide feedback, we are sending out an email, and we will be sharing the PowerPoint as well, and links to resources. So thank you all for your time today. We wish you all the best. Take care.